Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Career Makers from TA Tech Live. I need permission to turn on my camera, please. We're just delighted to have you here. This program is a little bit different from your typical webinar series or interview series over the web. We spend a lot of time talking about strategy and tactics and talent acquisition, and we spend a lot of time talking about technology. But at this program, what we're really going to do is talk about the people who make those things work. We're going to talk about their careers, how they became the success that they are, the challenges they faced, the opportunities that they took advantage of. And for today's program, I am very pleased to welcome a legend in his time, Lou Adler, the CEO of Performance-Based Hiring Learning Systems and the author of Hire with Your Head and The Essential Guide for Hiring. Lou, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thank you very much, Peter. Good to be here. I think we were both legends at some time. I don't know if we're still legends.
Well, sometimes I feel like we're sort of the last people standing, but
I think that's definitely true.
So anyway, it's really great to have you here. Let's begin by having you tell the audience a little bit about your company and what it does and what you do there.
Well, my company has changed shape over the years. And when I started recruiting, which was 1978, I've been a full-time recruiter. During that period of time, the 90s, after we placed 500 to 1,000 people, we started seeing serious trends that definitely predicted on-the-job performance. As a result of that, our clients asked us to train their people into hiring. We then moved into a total training company. So we don't necessarily do training. We now do, we train other companies and other recruiters on how to train and hire people. As I reach the level of age of you, I realize that that's no longer a full-time responsibility or interest, but we still do it. So I still am in a semi-retired state, helping other companies hire great people in a variety of ways, from interviewing, hiring, recruiting, and closing.
Okay, so as a writer myself, I have great respect for other writers. So tell us a little bit about your book. I think you have a new edition coming out. Is that right?
Yeah, the fourth edition of Hire with Your Head will be coming out in September, published by Wiley. Three additional versions of that. One in 1997 was the first one, which was really based on 20 years of recruiting and trying to see these patterns as they developed. Second edition was in 2002, third in 2007. I then wanted to write a book that was also geared to candidates if they weren't being interviewed properly. And that turned out to be The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired. Wiley didn't want to do it. Too many audiences, they couldn't figure out how to do it. Then we went back to Wiley with the fourth edition, which will be out in a month.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you come from? Where'd you go to school? What was it like when you were a kid?
Well, I grew up, I was born in the Bronx, New York, moved out to Long Island when I was 8 years old. So I went to grammar school and high school in Long Island, went to school upstate New York, an engineering school right on the Canadian border, Clarkson. And I told a story yesterday of how my first job happened in recruiting. And this was definitely a great way to figure out your life's career. It was Vietnam, and I was probably the same era of you. I was actually tried to get an Air Force ROTC, but they wouldn't let me near an airplane. But there's another story behind that. But it was definitely March of '68, I guess. Weather upstate New York was snowing. I get an offer to work in an aerospace company in Southern California. And all I asked was two questions. What's the weather and would I get relocation allowance? I never had like $600 in my life, so I got that for relocation. And I said, what's the weather? And they said it was 72 degrees. They said, I'll take that offer. So that's how I wound up. That's the way I advise people to always take offers based on the weather and if there's some kind of relo. So, but nonetheless, I learned a lot from that period of time. So So that's the kind of the short history of, it's not how I got into recruiting, but that's a different story, which if you have time, we can talk about that as well.
Oh yeah, we're going to definitely get there. But what did you do at the first company you joined? What was your initial?
Oh, I was a guidance and control systems engineer, and my first project was to figure out when you should blow up a nuclear missile that was not going to hit the target. So, and they thought I was an electrical engineer, turned out to be a mechanical engineer. So I learned to deal with how do you learn fast and how do you understand stuff. So that was my first job. So that was literally, it was pretty cool. But which I found even more fascinating is everybody on the team hated the work. And it was 40, 50 guys, and literally it was all men. And it turned out that every one of those people on that team, and they were like, say, 25 to 50, I guess, hated the job. It turned out they were doing, prior to that year, every one of them was working on a lunar lander project, putting a man on the moon. That project got canceled when they figured out how to do it. So they all moved them to this nuclear guidance program, Minuteman missile, and they didn't like the job. Exactly the same work, but the job, the mission of the job wasn't very motivating. I did it because I was 22 years old and it was kind of cool job and kind of fun, kind of depressing when you think about the results of your success weren't positive, but that's where I really learned the mission was critical. So even in the way I post jobs and we understand it, I say, why would a top person want this job? And if you don't get the mission right, you're not going to attract the right people, because that's really, the mission is half the drive of motivation and success. So the mission matters. And I really got a lesson in that when I was 22, which was 50 plus years ago.
So it's important to obviously get the specs for the job right. But what you're saying is that recruiters have to be much more sensitive to what the organization's mission is, what its vision is, where it's trying to go if they want to attract top talent. Is that right?
Well, I think they have to understand the candidate, him or herself. What's in it for the candidate? Sometimes it's that mission. For an engineer, it could be the macro mission, which is, hey, what project am I working on? It could be the micro mission of, hey, I'm learning this cool technology. For someone in healthcare, it could be giving back to the patient or something. But whatever it is, you have to know it. And that's really how you're going to attract the right people. I remember talking with one woman 10 years or so ago. She was struggling to find nurses to go on a helicopter. And I just asked her in a training session, why do people do that? And she said because they save lives every day. And I just said, well, where do you have that in your message? She said, I don't. I said, well, why don't I just put that in the title? Flight nurses helping save lives every day. She called me back 3 months later and virtually screamed that it worked within days. 3 months she was looking, didn't get anybody. Just that mission, helping save lives every day, changed the nature of that job to that person. So it's different for everybody, but as a recruiter, you do have to know it. And when you know it, it's a game changer, because it's just like marketing. Why do people buy your product? Well, why do they buy your job? Is it because you make more money and get free bagels for breakfast? No, it's probably some internal mission that drives them to success. And if you can capture that, you're going to capture some great people.
So for a consumer company, they can do a survey of potential consumers, potential buyers of the product. Recruiters, I guess, could do a survey of job seekers, but it would be tough to get honest answers. Where do they go? Where do they go to get that information? What causes the gleam in the eye of the best candidates?
Great question. What I do is, and we get confronted this early, and people say, well, our jobs aren't that exciting. I said, well, they're exciting to anybody who works there? Oh yeah, some people like it. I said, well, let's interview the people who really like the job and find out and capture that mission. We did something with a call center for a big insurance company. I actually literally wanted to talk to the people. And they were generally women who were 35 to 45. It was to me, it was a very structured job. They loved it because they had great benefits close to home. They could meet their kids, drop them off to school, and pick them up after school. So that was a message: have a great life and a great job. So that was the message. Other messages, we did something with Bose Corporation. They were looking for creative interns. I said their descriptions weren't creative. I get a call. They said, must be creative. I said, that's not very creative. So I get a call a couple of months later from the VP marketing, and he said, I think you'll like this tagline. Interns, prepare white papers in any color you want. It was for a marketing job. Prepare white papers in any color you want. Man, I just had chills when I heard it. And this is like 15 years later. I still get chills thinking about it, is they captured that essence in those words.
Yeah.
And they said that was it. They didn't change anything else with the job description, just that motivator. And when you find it, you got it. And it's something invaluable.
Well, you are clearly passionate about recruiting. So let's explore how you got from designing nuclear missile abort structures to recruiting, to talent acquisition. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a weird one. As part of being an engineer, which was only a couple of years, I got on an MBA program and got an MBA. And then I got into financial analysis and manufacturing. Literally, that's what happened. So then I had engineering, manufacturing, cost accounting, analysis, root cause, all this kind of stuff. But pretty quickly, and I was on pretty fast track at a couple of major corporations. And I was running a company when I was 31 or 32, which was definitely over my head, but nonetheless, I was running one. I hated the group president. And you and I probably talked about this story, some event many, many years ago. The guy thought I was totally incompetent. Every 3 weeks, I was totally incompetent. The other 2.5 weeks, I was great. I mean, when he wasn't around, we did everything we said we were going to do. So I quit 4 times in 1 year. Then the president would call me, and then the chairman would call me and make me, and I just couldn't take it. After the 4th or 5th time, I just quit. But I was using these recruiters who were pretty interesting, and I knew I was only going to be, so I quit, and I knew I had this opportunity. So I just said, let me be a recruiter. My wife supported that decision. We'd gone to these recruiters and they were very successful. One of them, who I'd used all the time, invited us, my wife and I, to dinner. So when I was 32 at the time, and they had a beautiful home. Everything was delightful, and they were working less than 40 hours a week. And as we're driving home, my wife says, "Why don't you become a recruiter?" And I had actually thought about it. So she supported. It took me another year to pull that off. But this is where I was having this aggravation. So I just quit the job and said, if it doesn't work, I'll find another job. But as I became a recruiter, because having the background in manufacturing, engineering, design, and cost accounting and financial planning and controls, I could see it was a business process. If you had a series of things you do all the time, you could actually manage the process much more efficiently. And as a recruiter, and I built this methodology, performance-based hiring, not for any altruistic reason. It was just as, hey, I think I could double my income in half the time by taking all the scrap away from it. Just like in a factory, if you have scrap, the first thing you do is, how do you prevent scrap? So in hiring, there's a lot of scrap involved. Why would a hiring manager ever need to see more than 3 or 4 people to make a decision? As long as those 3 or 4 people were real good. And as long as those 3 or 4 people thought the job was a career move. And better than anything else, you start kind of putting all the pieces together and then tracking it after literally hundreds of times over 10 years. I said, if everybody does this, they'll get the right answer. And that became performance-based hiring. So I think it was a combination of when to blow up a nuclear missile when it's off track is the same thing. When do you blow up a hiring process when it's off track? And that's actually how it came about.
So you decided you wanted to be a recruiter. Did you strike out on your own as a contract recruiter? Did you go to work for a staffing company? How did, what was the transition?
So this is the interesting thing. So I actually, these recruiters I was using, it's only 2 of them. And I placed, and as I was running a manufacturing company, so I hired 6 or 7 people from them over the course of a year and a half in manufacturing. And it was an automotive manufacturing, we're making automotive components. So I just went with them. I said, hey guys, what about this? And they actually asked me, Lou, they tried to place me a couple other times, but they want you to become a recruiter working for us. So it's 3 of us. I made my first placement in 3 weeks. And literally 50% of my first year income from the year before I made in 3 weeks, placed a plant manager in an automotive manufacturing company. And the way I did that is the hiring manager, whom I knew from my automotive days, he knew I was a recruiter. So I said, Mike, what are you looking for? And he had this crummy little job description with a bunch of stuff on it. I said, Mike, that's not a job description. That's a person description. What do you want the person to do? He said, I want someone to turn around my manufacturing plant. So I said, fine, let's go out in the manufacturing plant. So we spent an hour going through that manufacturing plant, trying to understand what needed to be turned around. Scrap issues, labor performance issues, lack of, the inventory was terrible. And since I knew the job, we just said, hey, well, I'll find somebody who can do this work, who can turn the plant around in a year. 3 weeks later, hired person. half my income in 3 weeks. I said, "Oh, this recruiting is the greatest thing in the world. Unbelievable." Didn't make another placement for 6 months because I learned something else that as I was ready to quit. I said, it's not for me. I did it once, but that was a fluke. But then I learned something which was called control the conversation. So many candidates opt out of a situation because they're only interested in what they get on the start date, the compensation, the title, and the location. And I realized, no, if this is a better career move, you have to listen to it. You have to understand it. And that's called controlling the conversation. Don't let a candidate opt out of the situation unless you know the job. But you can't present the job unless you've done this analysis of what is the real job up front. So that once I figured that out, it took 6 months. I said, now I'm in the game here. So once that happened, I could make as many placements as I want. And it was unbelievable, literally unbelievable. And I said, I think I could double my income in half the time. And I did that 3 or 4 years in a row. So that really became the methodology of which I advocate now, which is performance-based hiring.
I actually want to follow up on two things you said. First, it seems to me that you got that first job because you knew somebody. You had a relationship with someone. You had a personal connection. So, if I'm a recruiter and I'm looking to build my book of business, one of the elements of a successful career is being a good relationship manager. You have to nurture your contacts, build out that book, right?
Yes, but it's how you do it that's important. So yes, I would say yes, but there's some prerequisites to be able to do that and have the credibility to do that.
So talk some more about that.
Okay, so the reason that I got that job, he knew me. But when I walked out, I said, this is not a job description, Mike. It's a person description. It was 10 years of this, 5 years of that. But having been in manufacturing, I knew that none of that mattered. What mattered is turning that plant around. So I had the hiring manager convinced that turning the plant around was a thing, and I could walk through the plant with him very comfortably and figure out what that was. I then had the same, no matter what job I took, if I didn't know the job, I would have no credibility whatsoever with the hiring manager. In recruiting, you got to remember, you got two buyers. One is the hiring manager, and the other is the candidate. And if the hiring manager is discriminating, he wants a top half or top third person. Well, let's define the top half, the top third or top quartile as a series of performance objectives. Then the other buyer is the candidate. So now you've got to also convince a great candidate that this job is a career job, even if it didn't offer the most money. So you have two buyers. And so when you have to develop credibility, if you're starting as a recruiter, you have to know the work. And you also have to know how to consult and advise people career-wise. And if you don't know the work, you have no credibility on either side. So that's why I say nurturing the right people with the right methodology is really the key. Nurturing is at the top of it, but how do you do it on recognizing you got two buyers? And pretty soon so the reason I got out of recruiting is an interesting story. I think it's an interesting story. I got to tell it now anyway, Peter. At first, I had placed a lot of people in finance and accounting, but after 10 years of it, you don't want to talk to any accountants anymore. If some people don't want to do it in a week, but it took me 10 years. So I probably started just doing general retained search for all industries in the early 90s. So in 1995, I absolutely stopped doing any 100% recruiting with accounting. But in 2005, I get a very nice call from a woman who is let's call a senior accountant at PricewaterhouseCoopers. She calls me up as Los Angeles, calls me up and says, Mr. Adler, I understand that you can get me a director or controller job in the entertainment industry. And I had done a lot of work in entertainment, Disney, Sony, Warner Brothers. So, and I made a lot of placements in the 90s, early 90s in those positions. But I said, well, I don't remember her name. I said, but I don't do that anymore, but this is an accountant. So I remember I'm not talking to accountants anymore, but she was a delightful woman. I said, well, how'd you get my name? And then she said to me, you placed my grandfather. And I said, oh God. And I went home and cried. I said, if I'm getting referrals from grandchildren, I don't want to do this anymore. Now it turned out that her grandfather actually was a client. I didn't place her, but part of that nurturing process you described is I had a lot of credibility. I mean, I really feel if I had a candidate who was, my job was a better career move, I would work hard at it. And I would work harder with the hiring manager to understand the job and defend my candidate that they could do the work. Because most managers aren't good at interviewing. So it was bridging that gap on both parties that was critical. And that got me a lot of credibility why I did. And I did got a lot of referrals from husband, wives, children, grandchildren was the first one, but nonetheless, and I pushed it hard and I was not shy, but if I believed it to be, this was the best career move, I'd push it. And I placed most of those people. And that's what I call the client control, or controlling the conversations. Make sure both parties had the right evidence to pull it together. And to pull that to me is the credibility factor that most recruiters lack, but the best recruiters have.
So SHRM did a survey of its membership, I think it was in 2019, and they discovered, much to their surprise, that the largest cohort of their membership was recruiters. And when they dug deeper into the data, what they discovered was that for a lot of companies, not all to be sure, but for a lot of companies, the entry-level position for a recent HR graduate was recruiting. So you take this person who has a bachelor's degree in human resource management, you bring them in and you say, okay, you are now anointed our recruiter. If in fact, and I completely agree with you, the key to doing good talent acquisition is first and foremost competency. You have to be able to talk to the hiring manager as if you know something about the position, the job that a candidate has to perform. So you had the advantage of having been in manufacturing and finance and accounting and all these things before you got into recruiting. What would you tell somebody who's a recent college graduate in HR who gets stuck in a recruiting position and needs to develop that competency? How would you tell them to begin?
Well, that's a great question, but there's two issues here. Then it goes one, recruiting and hiring strategy, as well as competence in knowing the work.
Right.
One of them is when you're hiring, and I don't think a young 22-year-old person getting into recruiting is going to be handling executive or senior technical or complicated positions.
Right.
They're going to handle what I call high volume rank and file positions, generally speaking of people who apply to the job. That's a filtering out process. When you start hiring for critical positions, and it could be a 2 to 3 year seasoned manager, technical person, engineer, sales rep, that's a different role. And I think it requires a different hiring process. The problem is a lot of companies take that high volume approach and try to hire more seasoned and executive and mid-management positions, and it doesn't work and they don't understand why. They try to do the process faster. So that's a strategic design process problem. From your perspective, we train recruiters all the time. I still do that. I talked to a bunch this morning. I just say the first question you have to ask is when they get a job description that lists skills, experiences, and competencies, and say, that's not a job description. That's a person description. Let's put the person description in the parking lot. Tell me what this person needs to do to be considered a hireable candidate. Or what would this person do over the course of the year to give you confidence and evidence this person's a great person if they were hired. We call that concept is win-win hiring. Hiring for the anniversary date, not the start date. On the anniversary date, to achieve a win-win hiring outcome, the candidate says, hey, I'm glad I took this job. And the hiring manager says, I'm glad I hired that person. Well, that's a totally different process than screening on skills, experiences, and negotiating for the start date. It's ensuring that the candidate is motivated and competent to do the work that needs to be done. So as a selfish standpoint, I said, hey, if you're going to be recruiting, buy the next edition of Hire With Your Head and just buy into that and read it before you ever do your first assignment. It will be helpful, very self-serving, but I still say it. And I believe it to be true. Or buy an old edition, you'll still be ahead of the game. So but the concept is if you know the work, you can be able to, and even if you're just doing high volume, understanding that candidate's intrinsic motivator and a couple of the things that the best people do differently, you just benchmark the best. Hey, I'm hiring for sales reps. Well, I want to meet some sales reps. What are the best of those people do differently than an average one? What are the best people in a call center do differently? What are the best people in a, whatever it is, accountant do different? If you understand, meet the people, and understand what motivates them to succeed, you'll certainly be in the game.
Okay, so we've talked about the successes, the considerable number of successes that you've had. Let's talk about the challenges. We all face challenges. We all hit speed bumps in our career. What think of a challenge that you faced that really taught you something about life, about professional development, about career self-management, and how did you handle it?
Well, there could be some positives and some negatives. I'll give you the positive one first that I feel is important. And this had to be probably when I was a financial analyst, and I make this kind of a statement. Is I was a financial analyst, I probably got my MBA 25 or 26, and I was sent and I got a promotion to be manager of capital budgeting and investments for automotive manufacturing company in Detroit. And within a month or so of that, I was sent overseas to do an investment analysis on a new acquisition, manufacturing plant in England, making automotive frames. Doesn't matter what they were making. And when I did the analysis at 25 or 26, I said, this is a piece of crap. There's no way we should buy this company. So I fly back to Detroit, tell the group president, I can't justify this, it's junk. And he says, justify it. I said, I can't do it. Like, it doesn't make sense. He says, make the numbers work. Here's a group president who ultimately became chairman of a Fortune 50 company. I said, Bill, I can't do it. He says, you're going to do it. You work for me. I'll take responsibility. So separately, because I had been transferred from corporate headquarters of this company, I called up the CFO of the company and said, I'm going to put this together, but this is 25. So I'm sitting here with my career in Detroit and knowing that this investment is worthless. I call up the CFO and I'm scared, literally scared. And he says, I'll take care of it. And the board meeting, and I had to do a presentation, or wasn't at the board meeting, but it was a board meeting, public whole thing. I had to put this fake analysis together to justify this acquisition, which the board agreed to go forward with. So here I had the president of the company knowing it was phony. I told the CFO of the company knowing it was phony, and they still went forward with it. 3 days after that acquisition was announced, the company also announced a major business with a major big three automotive company was going to buy every single production and triple the production of the company. And then the president of the company called me up and says, Lou, I couldn't tell you that. I couldn't tell you this was private information. They told us if we bought this company, they would let it procure everything. So then I learned something there is that sometimes you have to do stuff. You have to be honest with yourself, but you don't know everything. And it was profound. I have to say it was really a profound learning experience, but in a very positive way. The guy was a great guy. The president of the company was great, even though he said you have to justify. He didn't tell me why. And it was just interesting to be in that high level position. So I learned something about business at that date, but you still had to be true. And the CFO of the company called me up and says, Lou, thanks for telling me. So he appreciated that. So I got credibility from that standpoint by sticking to what I thought was right. So that was a real learning lesson of, hey, if you believe you're right, push it forward. But now the bad thing is I do that and I've aggravated a lot of presidents of companies. I tell them they're full of crap and they don't agree with it. So even though I believe it, it's cost me some clients as a result of being too frank and outspoken. So, and probably some friends as well. But so it's got the good and the bad side to those kinds of things.
Interesting. Okay. Here's my favorite question for our interview. We're actually a little past our allotted time, but I want to hear your answer to this. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self about how to build a successful career?
Yeah, that's a good one. I knew you were going to ask something like that. Obviously you look back and you say, you got a background in engineering. I did real well. I had a fast track in careers. I even thought that if I stayed in the career focus, which I certainly had the opportunity to, I mean, there was no question I could stay in corporate America. I've been retired now. So I think you have to kind of find, so the advice I would say, I certainly wouldn't have said become a recruiter. That's certainly not it. But so I don't know what I would actually say given what I know now, because it's such a weird experience that I have, I look at my track record, and, God, is this weird? Why would I ever do it? And in some ways, I really thought it was stupid what I did. I sometimes even today at 75, I think it was stupid. But I guess I would say is find something you really enjoy doing, that you're good at, be true to yourself, and understand it. But I really believe my career is so screwed up and I'm so outspoken that I don't think the advice I give to people, other than don't make strategic long-term decisions using tactical information. And the reason I say that is a candidate I tried to place decided to take another job because the money was greater, the company was closer, the title was better, the company was closer, and he got more money. It turned out it was a terrible decision to make because it didn't offer any long-term growth. So if I was to go back to my 21-year-old self, know what I know now, I'd say, don't make long-term career decisions using short-term data. Irrespective of what that is, look at your investment in time as your most critical asset and manage that time as valuably as you can, not by what you get on the start date.
There you have it. I don't think you can get better career advice than what Lou just gave you. Lou, thank you very, very much for spending some time with us today. It's always enlightening when I have a chance to chat with you. So thank you very much for being here today. For those of you who are enjoying this series on an ongoing basis, our next interview is going to be with Shalia Gray, who is the VP of Talent Acquisition at Quadient. She's a wonderful example of a woman who's made a very successful career in this field, faced down the challenges, leveraged the opportunities, and I think we'll all learn a lot from her as well. So again, my thanks to Lou Adler. Don't forget to get the latest edition of his book. And Lou, I hope we'll see each other again soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for inviting me. Greatly appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.